Hi, this is the second part to a much longer reaction. If you haven't seen it yet, links to it are in the description as well as the top corner of the video. Now with all that out of the way, let's continue with this then, shall we?
Over the extremely long course of making this video, I put a call out to my Twitter followers for fake video game recommendations, and as ever, my human-powered search engine did not disappoint. But one of the most striking returns wasn't so much a fake video game as it was a single mysterious image. A picture of an old desolate house drawn in stark black and white pointillism, like it's being generated on some old beat up processor. Its atmosphere thick with a subtle dread, and the text, "You sense a presence somewhere in this room. Proceed." Whatever this was, I wanted to see more, the only problem being that more didn't seem to exist. The only information I had to go off was a Tumblr tag, Ghost Gods, leading to a blog that no longer existed. Even when viewed through the Wayback Machine, it showed a page empty of artwork. It was frustrating, and I'll save you the tedious internet scavenger hunt that followed, but I did eventually find an old archive blog of all Ghost Gods work, posted by Ghost Gods themselves, even detailing their reasons for deleting the original. And while I fully understand the pull to delete everything you've ever done and disappear from the internet, I think it's a real loss in this case. What really got me about that first image was the atmosphere, and my god, was that just
that has some serious pull to it.
There were environments that captured everything from a kind of melancholy coziness to others an ambiguous dread. Like something here is wrong, you're just not quite sure what. Other pieces were more unsettling, some even showing these beautiful and horrific nightmare creatures. But what really struck me about so many of these images was the vague sense that they were all part of some interconnected world, which you could see in series like these sketches detailing some horrific abandoned swimming pool, a building that seems to have grown some kind of bizarre sentience, its walls pulsating with strange growths, organs dripping through its water slides, parts of the building disappearing into gaping maws and gnashing teeth. I love these pictures. There's a real feeling of exploration in them. They don't feel super polished or finished, instead like the development of an idea, something to be fit into a larger whole. Which is why you may find it unsurprising that there is also here posts illustrating loading screens, inventory menus, and contextual choices. As nestled deep within this deleted blog, there lies a fake video game, Field Trip. What looks like a surreal Yume Nikki-like RPG Maker game, in which the player is pulled deeper and deeper into a bizarre world of strange environments. Given the nature of this archive, it's hard to say for sure which pieces are part of Field Trip and which aren't, but even just the process of trying to figure that out is compelling. The feeling that through this deleted Tumblr, you are peering into this old forgotten world of a video game that never existed and trying to make sense of it. And there's something a little spooky about that, right? Like walking around an abandoned house, nothing but the furniture, wallpaper, and decor, traces letting you know that someone used to be here. But just like an old abandoned house, fake video games can create a tremendous amount of unease with one simple idea. What if you are not alone here?
No.
What if something is in here with you? The legend of Polybius is a strange
there we go, Polybius,
that appeared around Portland, Oregon from 1981 to 1984. So addictive that massive lines would form in front of it. Some of its players later suffering from amnesia.
I've seen several videos talking about this thing.
Stranger still were the rumors of men in black coats that would be seen performing maintenance on the machine, who didn't collect its coins, but we're collecting something. There being rumors that Polybius was part of a government-run mind control experiment. Given some of the wackier exploits of the US government, none of this is as unbelievable as you'd think. There were actual newspaper reports of video games causing sickness in the 80s, and the FBI really were monitoring arcades, but mostly for drugs as opposed to mind control was what they'd want you to think. The truth is, there's very little proof that Polybius ever actually existed. But what there was an article in a 2003 GamePro magazine, which disseminated Polybius myth to a wider public, marking the first widespread urban legend of a video game housing some kind of malevolent force.
I.e., you know, all basically every creepypasta from the early 2000s, basically. Yeah. Which I never really got into the little creepypasta thing. I do remember, like, the one of the few I read, and I absolutely loved back in the day, was one called The Other Internet. And it's where this guy goes to, like, this abandoned facility or whatever, and like it's a like abandoned lab or something. And there's this like one like Ethernet phone port on the wall, and he plugs his laptop into it, and it's connected to the internet of another dimension, like one that's really messed up. And I forget, it's been a long time since I read it. Oh god, I completely forgot where I was going with that. I'm very sorry.
And it was just the beginning, because around that same time frame, the first traces of creepypastas were materializing
there we are.
online, with internet user networks like Usenet now reaching a level of ubiquity that meant those spooky internet stories now had communities through which they could spread. One of the most popular kinds of creepypastas being fake video games.
Yeah, the haunted game cartridge where they had realistic blood coming out of the eyes.
And there were a lot. Sonic.exe was a
Sonic
game where
Sonic
the player
.exe
is pursued by a nightmarish version of Sonic. Ben Drowned was about a boy who found a corrupted version of Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, only to be haunted by a bizarre statue within it that begins to seep into his real life. Herobrine was a Minecraft creepypasta about a strange white-eyed figure that could sometimes be seen stalking the player from a distance.
Who was supposedly like Notch's dead brother or something.
Mr. Mix was a typing game so difficult it caused panic attacks in players, the few who reached its final level discovering something so disturbing that they refused to speak about it. I could go on here, and I shall. Mario 128, Luna, Pale Luna, The Theater, Misfortune.gb, Animal Crossing Dead Town. Every copy of Mario 64 is unique. The Haunted Nest Godzilla
I forgot
game,
about
Mr.
that.
Bones Wild Ride,
Oh
Dying
god,
Happy, Who Are You Running From? The Butcher's Nursery, Into the Forest, Playing Along with Evelyn, JVK1166Z.esp. Anyway, that's actually probably enough for you to get the idea. Covetous, Never Forget, New Game Minus, Pokemon Snow on Mount Silver, Pokemon Lavender Town Syndrome, Pokemon Strangled Red,
A lot of Pokemon.
Come Follow Me, Pokemon Black, like before the actual Pokemon Black, Pokemon Dead Channel, Pokemon Buried Alive, Pokemon Lost Silver, Pokemon Ash's Coma, Pokemon Oh God, Dotrio's Got a Gun. Okay, I made that last one up. What I want to ask here is why? What is it about fake video games that make such fertile ground for horror? And I think that's a combination of two things. One, as we've talked about, all fake video games really are these little abstract worlds. And two, the best definition I have ever heard for horror is that horror is the dissolution of our world's boundaries. What this means is that in order to exist in our world and feel like it has some semblance of safety and order, there's certain rules we have to accept as reality, that we are safe within our homes, that our loved ones would never hurt us, that the dead cannot come back to life, or that we are the dominant species within the universe. It's those boundaries that make the world make sense, and horror happens when those boundaries dissolve. What is a haunted house but a space where the rules we understand the world by break down, and through those cracks in reality, we see something sinister. Fake horror video games work exactly the same way, but what's so cool is how they can convey that idea through the language of video games. There's a specific thing that happens when a video game's world breaks, glitches. If we accept a video game's boundaries to be the lines of code that twist together into the rule sets that define these worlds, glitches are what happens when those rule sets begin to contradict and snap.
Which, I mean, isn't that literally just, you know, a lot of analog horror? I mean, how many analog horror series are based on, like, old games that didn't actually exist?
Character models warp, textures distort, and NPCs begin to behave in bizarre ways. And it can be kind of amusing, but it's also sort of spooky. A tear in this reality, letting us see into parts of it we are not meant to. And what's so cool about so many of these fake horror video games is that they'll use the idea of glitches, of a corrupted video game, as the visual representation that its boundaries are dissolving, its world breaking down, and asking, what if through those cracks in this reality we see something staring back at us? Now granted, a lot of those stories did conclude with all the subtlety of the phallic motorcycle guy from the 7 remakes, but I don't think that should take away from just how cool a concept this is. And there's a lot of modern fake horror video games taking this idea of a broken video game housing some insidious entity and evolving it in some really creative and disturbing ways.
I point you towards I don't know. Actually, at this point, I don't know how many like Game Theory has gone over. Like a lot of those like YouTube channels and stuff. Jeez.
The Lacey series is a collection of fictional Let's Plays where the player controls Lacey, star of a not real 2007 Flash game, as she works different jobs through different minigames. And everything about them, from their color palette to their gameplay, echoes this hyper-effeminate and very specific era of Flash games. And it's convincing. There are loading bars, there are poorly designed, albeit very believable menus, and artwork that has this kind of how to draw manga roughness to it. However, as you continue through these videos, the kinds of things Lacey is tasked with become strange and cruel. The world around her begins to break, the artwork corrupting into these distorted and disturbing images, all implying a far darker reality than the player originally expected. And it's awesome. To me, it captures the very unsettling vibe of mid-2000s internet, a place less so of monolithic social media platforms and more tens of thousands of disparate user-run websites. Meaning, stumbling into something that you really shouldn't have was common. But Lacey's captures that feeling beautifully. But also, through the corruption of this world, it forces you to ask the question of how does something this fucked up come into existence, and the kind of person who would make a game like this. The fictional creator of these games, not the actual creator. Seems fine. Lacey is interesting because it evolves that core concept of some insidious entity or awful truth at the center of a broken video game, but there are a lot of modern horror fake video games exploring that same idea. Petscop is another fictional LP series with collecting these delightful little creatures before gradually peeling back the layers of this reality and revealing the disturbing truth as to why it exists. Crow64 builds an entire media campaign around a cancelled N64 beta, and through its broken world, can we see the disturbing effects that cancellation had on its creator and his family. Diminish is a less horror-focused series communicated through a fabricated Let's Play, in which an unseen person plays through a fictional, ultra-difficult video game created by his dead sister, the memory of her communicating with him through the trials he has to endure in this game. All these games are cool and interesting and worth deep dives, but unfortunately, I have only so much blood in my veins. But there is one I just have to talk about. A fake video game that takes the concept of an insidious force hiding inside a corrupted game world to a whole other level. Valverde begins like a lot of old creepypastas do. Someone finds a videotape in a forest, and when they watch it, they see better footage of an old, unreleased video game. But it's in this footage that Valverde begins to peel itself apart from everything else. It opens with a fake PlayStation boot-up screen. There is a language select, a strange memory card reader screen, even an introduction movie that is skipped by the player. By the time you hit Valverde's title screen, it already feels bizarrely real. This is too much effort to be an actual fake video game, right? And that uncanniness does not go away, as upon selecting a new game, a fully animated opening cutscene plays.
Oh my god,
The player
what?
then taken through a character creator and zone select, and from here, we touch down in a gorgeously designed village of limited polygons but infinite charm. The little villagers going about their little lives, working their little jobs. As a new resident of this village, your goal seems to be nothing more than to integrate into this community. The Fox Mayor, whose authority has been vested him by something called the Smiling One, I'm sure that's fine, gives you a house whose previous owner left a long time ago and has never come back. That's also fine. Clearly there is nothing of concern happening here. We could stop right there, and Valverde would already be one of the most impressive fake video games we've talked about. Everything from its lo-fi graphics drowning it in uncanny 32-bit nostalgia, to its mini-games, to just the care that's been put into its menus, intricately designed and
absolutely beautiful,
with different icons suggesting so much of what this experience might be. It all so completely captures the feeling of staring into this little video game world through some lost beta footage. And that is when Valverde has you where it wants you.
Oh god, what's going to happen?
Something else in this world with you begins to creep in.
Oh, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
It begins when the Fox Mayor attempts to introduce the player to the other people who have moved to this island. But where dialogue should be is instead cracked, glitched out text, ghostly portraits in place of character art.
What portraits of actual people.
Here? The more Valverde you experience, the more of those questions you'll ask. What's with the unsettling amount of religious imagery in this game? Why are the landscapes that surround the village so strange and random? Who are the people in these portraits, and why does it feel like they're watching you? As those questions
because they are,
the peaceful video game world of Valverde begin to splinter and break. Textures bulge and crack. Villagers start to act in strange, uncanny ways. As the serene landscape vacillates and warps around you, glitches tearing open holes in this reality that reveal its deeper layers, twisted and frightening places, stalked by massive and impossible beings. And soon, Valverde feels less like the pristine little village you arrived at, and more like some abominable abyss, an ever-expanding void pushing through the corrupted world of a video game. But where that feeling hits a ludicrous peak is when the player encounters something impossible deep within Valverde's.
Impossible how?
Fake video game, Tharsis, a strange third-person action survival horror entirely different from Valverde, with its own cutscenes, its own visual style, a player select both a third and first person mode, its own menus. This strange pocket reality now seeming to bleed into Valverde's other worlds. And this is when I stopped understanding what Valverde was. The moment it...
Wait, so is this thing right here? That's a character from the other game. So, like, in universe, they're like merging or like crossing over due to, I don't know, the Smiling One? Oh, jeez.
Went from an abyss and became an infinity. And as for the malicious entity that lies at the center of that infinity, all the way at the bottom of Valverde, we encounter it. An artificial, self-determinate god who has locked itself away from this world. So terrified is it by what it has created. Now, constantly generating new pieces of this place, designed to lock all of humanity within this nightmare, so that our sins not upset the real God any further, lest we draw his wrath.
What?
At least that's what I think is happening.
Okay, trying to figure out. So that would explain, I don't know, the realistic pictures. Those were actual people that played the game before, and they were sucked in, I guess? And then, so, oh god, a vengeful god. Trying to protect us in its own sick, twisted way. But, oh god, I'm gonna have to look this up, aren't I? Oh no.
I don't know. Valverde is such an amazing evolution of the concept of some sinister entity lying at the heart of a fake video game. Straight up one of the coolest things I have ever encountered on the internet. But it brings us to a problem. Criminally, Valverde doesn't have that much of an audience. Its second part, featuring that second fake video game and artificial god, has at the time of writing less than 100,000 views. Meanwhile, Valverde explainer videos get many multiples of that, which, just to be clear, is not the fault of the people making these explainer videos, and particularly Nightmind, who urges you to go watch the original, and he's right. I think it's a problem that comes with how online content like this is sometimes consumed, that there's this belief that discovering the secret message of a piece of media is more important than what that media feels
Actually
like to
is.
experience. And personally, I think that's a belief for wankers. To me, the emotion you feel while experiencing a piece of art, that is the art. If you want to feel the abyss-like experience that is Valverde and what is so special about it, sit down in a dark room and just fall down these videos. Let Valverde happen. And if you want to go down the rabbit hole of explainer videos after that, go for it. But you should never be taking your opinion on any piece of media from any YouTube video, especially mine. I think Modern Simpsons is good. If you want to know what is so special about these worlds, you gotta walk around them yourself. That is the appeal of experiencing a fake video game from an audience perspective. And if we tie this all the way back to Persona 5 Imagining Project, this was the first time a lot of people had that experience and were able to engage with how fucking cool it is. Which leaves us with one last question. What is the purpose of making a fake video game as a creator? Why would someone pour so much time and effort into doing this? And that
I again point you towards my fanfiction answer. Actually, how long has this been going? Yeah, almost 2 hours ago. Yeah.
That, friends, brings us to quite possibly the most bizarre fake video game in existence. Even
It
by
gets
Lumpy
weirder.
Touch's, very high standards, Breaking Bad Game Boy is fucking bizarre.
Oh god,
Taking
yeah. I remember I discovered these. Oh god, the Breaking Bad Game Boy. Did it get so weird after he becomes like a god or something?
Breaking Bad, one of the most respected and influential TV crime dramas of all time, and transmogrifying it into this grotesque story of body horror where the cast of the show become these nightmarish kaiju beings and commit bloody battle across the skyline of Albuquerque, somehow through that story retaining the drama and even thematic narrative flow of the TV show. That already is a fucking insane idea, but is even further lunaticized by being compressed down and squeezed through the lo-fi format of a Game Boy, using the visual language and mechanical context of the games of that tiny console. There are shop menus, there are QuickTime events, there are full-on gameplay sections with on-screen instructions.
Oh, God,
it is
yeah.
weird, but it is also one of the most uniquely compelling experiences I have ever encountered on the internet. But even more than that, it is an idea that should not exist, and yet it does. One that left me with a single burning question. Why? Why take a concept as insane as Breaking Bad told with kaiju body horror and then squeeze it through the medium of a Nintendo handheld? What?
I mean, you're asking the guy who also made, it was like Gorefield or something. He made like a similar like Game Boy-esque like playthrough videos of like a fake, Garfield game where Garfield was, an unimaginable horror. Actually, I think Super iPad talked about that in his Garfield video, if I remember correctly.
Possesses a person to create something like this? And that is a question I grew so obsessed with that I eventually reached out to Lumpy Touch and asked them directly. Their answer was unusually enlightening. Rather than making essentially a Breaking Bad fan movie from start to finish, I'm just showing bite-sized snippets of gameplay from the larger narrative. A part might highlight a story beat or game mechanic, and then in the next part, we've time skipped forward. What did we skip over? Viewers enjoy filling in the blanks, imagining high quality gameplay, maybe a platform or point and click adventure game. Some of my favorite comments are people making walkthroughs for a game that doesn't exist. They've analyzed the footage and extrapolated game mechanics, levels, strategies, etc. It's awesome. Seeing Lumpy Touch reflects so much of how I felt about fake video games and how they invite the viewer to collaborate was honestly really validating and made me feel like slightly less of a crazy person. I think one of the reasons I have been so willing to pour such an ungodly amount of time into this fucking video is because I genuinely think fake video games invite the viewer to engage
Play
in a way
along,
that
basically, yeah.
fewer art forms do. And the fact that they don't actually exist, that they are not complete projects, is a huge part of that because it forces us to ask not what is this, but what could it be? And I think that's a really powerful thing. Something that would arguably be lost if these were real
actual
games. And it was on that incomplete nature that Lumpy Touch said something else that for me slid into place the final piece of the puzzle in understanding why people create fake video games. Originally, when I set out to make content, I envisioned myself as a game dev rather than an animator. Unfortunately, making games is hard. Making fake games means I can sort of scratch that itch, build these worlds, and not invest 7 years of my life. I think this point is a big deal. We are now several generations into people growing up with video games as the dominant form of media, and video games being such a huge part of people's lives from such an early age, of course they're going to want to replicate that art. The only problem being is that making video games is hard. Really fucking hard. While you do have exceptions like Bloodborne Kart, a fake video game that Pinocchio'd its way into becoming real, video game development is a viper's nest of multiple creative arts and technical sciences, all pulling each other apart. The worst game you have played is a miracle. But with fake video games, they allow people to create the illusion of those realities without the monolithic barrier to entry, which means so many more people can build those worlds, so many more ideas can exist. So, to put all this together, Persona's IP obviously is not available, and the technical skill and manpower to actually make it happen would have been completely impossible. This could have only existed as a fake video game, and in those terms, it was successful. It was compelling. Even a decade after this was categorically proved to be a hoax, there are still people building onto it and cataloging it. And to add one last delicious layer of intrigue, the actual creator was never found. The Atlas XP5 YouTube channel going silent after the actual announcement of Persona 5, only for 6 years later to post 2 final cryptic videos, suggesting that maybe there was actually something more real here, but who fucking knows? I don't. But if you would like to know more about Persona 5 Imagining Project, I'm going to link to a phenomenal video by YouTuber Blue, who did an incredible job in detectiving all this information together. But as it stands, it's through Imagining Project we can see so much of what is so strange and special about fake video games. Which means, now that we understand all this, we can now answer that final question.
We're actually answering it?
Have I wasted a significant portion of my life making this video? Okay, I lied. We are going to address this. And to do so, we are going to talk about one final fake video game. And if I'm going to be honest here, it was this fake video game that is the entire reason this video exists. Meaning, the last hour and 20 minutes have really just been one long introduction.
Oh God, what's happening?
God, I'm bad at this. I
Plasto.
remember one of the first pieces of the artist Plasto that stood out to me. It was an illustration of the character Honey from the Sega Saturn game Fighting Vipers, and I love Honey. A lot of 90s fighting game characters had this really cool street fashion spliced with martial arts gear look that to this day I still think is awesome. And Honey with her gothic Lolita dress blended with chunky protective gear, chest plates, elbow pads and shin guards, it captures that look in such a cool way. Her in-game story is that she wants to enter the Fighting Vipers tournament to promote her fashion brand, and beyond that, the most interesting things about her is that she's called Candy in Europe, and she also has an unlockable furry persona in Sonic the Fighters. That's basically everything you can know about the character, and so when you imagine fan art of her, beyond her look, there's not a whole lot to really draw on, and yeah.
Oh God.
The blue smudge trailing across her cheek, the streak of red on her pristine white glove, her face contorted into this ghoulish grin, her eyes curling upward in delight, the eerie way she's looking up at you. It's like you, the viewer, have just hurt her, but she's delighted about it. As if the piece is asking, what if at the center of Honey's cute veneer is a frightening and violent person? It's kind of chilling, and if Plasto can create something this unsettling from this fucking character, it should tell you how good Plasto is at creating unsettling imagery. Their illustrations often feeling like these development sketches for some lost horror movie, frequently obscuring monsters behind scenery so that you never see the full thing, but generating an incredible amount of tension and intrigue. Some even creating horror from the mere implication that something might be there, lurking in the darkness. And that's an idea that's come up over and over in this video, right? The ability for an artist to imply something more than what we can see. And in the same way fake video game artists do this with the mechanical context of video games, Plasto does the same through dozens of different mediums and formats. Sometimes it's a news report warning of strange creatures with the ominous text, "They are silent." Sometimes it's packaging for Halloween masks that look just a little too real. But one of my favorites is this image of two creepy faces, and by itself it is unsettling, but look at how much meaning and context Plasto injects into this piece by printing that image as the missing notice on the side of a milk carton with a tag that says Evidence 3, asking so many questions about what happened here and the kind of story that contains this moment. Plasto is exceptional at this, combining different mediums and formats to create these strange narratives, often mashing together multiple images in the same composition, like it's some stream of conscious work in progress for a final piece that we never see. And it's weirdly unsettling, especially when it creates narratives that suggest something awful and frightening. Like this piece, where we see an image of a girl stepping forward with a welcoming look on her face, and then some kind of grotesque creature, its head encased in a metal device, clutching what looks like a newborn child. Then the same girl's face contorted in terror, the same face again, now collapsed and broken. And finally, an empty chair sitting next to a memorial picture of the girl as a shadow of something looms out of frame. Sometimes Plasto will even build these narratives into entire worlds across multiple different secondary pieces, like a city flooded with a demonic red light, where there are no people, only bizarre elongated entities that stalk its streets and peek out at you from behind doorways. Another being a bizarre reality where small plush-like creatures wander these broken, desolate landscapes, encountering these awful, otherworldly beings and massive, grotesque nightmare creatures, all while their perception of themselves and the reality around them warps and distorts. And yet another of of these worlds is a nightmarish school building where something is very wrong, where uncanny monsters stalk its hallways and bloated abominations lurch from the shadows. And as a side note, I really love the detail here that the monster has the same hair color, hair clip, and even eye patch as the girl at the bottom of the stairs, suggesting
something is
much
going
about what
on.
might be happening here. The reason I'm going so deep on Plastobu's more traditional work is that through it, you can see what a weirdly perfect fake video game artist they are, even without mentioning their fake video games, drawing us in with images that ask questions, turning those questions into narratives through different mediums and formats, and using secondary pieces to build those narratives into worlds.
I could see every single one of this being a piece in like an analog horror series or something. Please tell me that Plasto has at least some form of following, because they deserve it. Because, like, again, I've said many times, I'm not one for horror. But, like, I can tell, I can see quality when it's put in front of me like this. And just, this is so good. It is so creepy and messed up.
In other words, the entire process we've been talking about this entire video. And it's when you look at this through Plastobu's fake video games that things get really special. Video games are a huge influence on a lot of Plastobu's work, something you can see in a lot of
kill Mario.
video game fan art. Not even just horror series like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or Bloodborne, but eerie renditions of games you wouldn't expect, like
Mother
Doom,
3.
like Earthbound, like Pokemon, as well as deeper cuts like Darkstalkers, Ico, Rival Schools, and Yume Nikki. One of their worlds even focusing on a haunted Animal Crossing village. Images showing bizarre doppelgangers appearing at night, or candid photographs where strange creatures wash up on shore, or bizarre specters loom ominously in the distance, suggesting an Animal Crossing village where something is very wrong, as well as the influence of a lot of old video game creepypastas. The earliest work I could find from Plasto was even this layout, which looks like some kind of rough design concept for a video game, but from here, Plasto would push and evolve that concept in so many weird and fascinating ways. And some of it's a kind of loosely implied video game, like this image of a girl collapsed next to a broken sword with the text, "Magical Girl After Battle," the distressed line work and rough pixelated fonts making it feel
After
like
a
a page
loss.
scan of some old beat up game guide, or their Codename series, where they pair children with these gigantic, bizarre creatures. And man, the style of drawing, the typeface used, the compositions, it all gives me the feeling of CD inserts for some lost Dreamcast fighting game, complete with what looks like an end-of-run boss. Other of Plastobu's fake video games are more direct, and it's here where you can see their love of
Undying
the aesthetic
Lonely
of video
Infant.
games, from fake box art and CD illustrations to full-on mock-up screenshots that cover a massive span of bizarre games, like Yummy Yummy Pumi, a strange PlayStation 1 survival horror about eating dinner, I think, that exists only across a few images, a mock-up screenshot that uses the limited low-polygon aesthetic of the PS1, as well as a full-on fake promotional poster, and even a game over screen with the text, "No one can hear Pumi." Other fake video games including Lilo is Lost, a lo-fi first-person experience about exploring a bizarre, never-ending shopping mall, or Dream Trading Archives, which honestly I don't know what the fuck is going on here, but it looks awesome, or Home, which is just a bizarre game which also has a scanned troubleshooting section from its manual with hints about what to do if you start getting messages from aliens, or if grandma and grandpa die. If 3 days pass once you arrive at the cottage and grandma and grandpa are not in the house or nearby, they might be deceased. This does not affect the game except for the attic that would not be accessible for the rest of the game. An occupied message will pop up every time you try to enter. This happens very rarely. Creating a new game file should make them appear. Loading a previous file will not bring them back. By now, I hope it's clear how natural Plasto is at creating fake video games, which leaves only the final fake video game I want to talk about.
And what is this? There's been so much build up.
The entire reason this video exists. One that incorporates not only everything we've talked about, but on a scale unlike anything else we've seen.
Why you should play Vermis.
The stone bricks sink into the pearly waters of the swamp as the path extends in front of you. You can distinguish a flat landscape covered in cloudy waters and weeping willows, all enveloped in a thick veil of mist. This is the Silver Swamp. It is eerily silent. There is not the sound.
Wait, is this the game he was talking about at the beginning of the video?
Is almost haunting. Once you cross the mist, the atmosphere is filled with a violent silence that only ceases with the splosh of your foot hitting the water. The shapes of the mist swirl and spiral around you, and sometimes you swear you could see people in them. A faceless woman holding a child, a girl whose face is frozen in terror, a naked man staring out at you from behind a tree, emanating a threatening aura. But the phantoms are not what scares you. The more time you spend in the mist, the more a weariness creeps into your bones. You find yourself in a constant battle just to stay conscious. If you happen to have a night watch mushroom, it will help you stay awake longer. Finally, a solid shape emerges from the mist, and you are confronted by the lost paladin.
Be gone, Shadow. Return to the fog. You will not fool me twice.
The lost paladin rushes you, raising his sword, only to crash to the ground, exhausted, collapsing into a deep slumber. Now that they are unconscious, you may choose to steal their sword. You do. You obtain the unbreakable path. Soon, you begin to worry that the paladin's fate will soon be yours. You try to stay awake, try to push through the deep mist and thick mud, but soon you can barely distinguish between reality and a dream. The swamp water covers your body like silken sheets. You stand on the surface of a vast and infinite lake beneath a
I want to know more about it.
The only light coming from a hanging moon. Below you, at your feet, beneath the water's surface, is a sea of corpses. And that is when it appears.
None have awakened from the dream. Resist not, and your flesh shall be banished, so your soul can rest under the peaceful waters, among many others.
The aspect of the dream draws its blade gracefully and lunges with inhuman speed. If the aspect's dream crosses your heart, the dream will end, and your body, consumed by the mist, will never be found. But the aspect is nimble as it is fragile. One single hit can end the illusion. Once the dream is shattered, you wake up in a different place. The mist is gone and the buzz of insects and nature surrounds you completely. You feel the cold breeze against your soaked clothes. You acquire a new weapon. Memory of the Stinger. What I just read is a slightly adapted passage from the book Vermis, and Vermis is simple. It is an official guide for a game that doesn't exist. Its pages are filled with
walkthroughs. That's what he was reading.
Bestiaries of the monsters you'll face in them, item pickups and their locations, even an in-depth list of character classes. But despite all this, what Vermis actually is, or how you interact with it, is curiously opaque. While its text is full of information about its world, it never goes so far to outright describe what kind of game Vermis is. There are no controller layouts, screenshots, or even descriptions of its gameplay mechanics. In fact, the only definitive clue I could find that Vermis is even intended as a video game is a fake torn sticker on the cover of its second volume reading "Game Disc Not Includ." And I'm going to assume that those missing letters are Ed. What this world is and how you experience it is a mystery, but that mystery is a huge part of the joy of experiencing Vermis. Rather than directly telling you anything, Vermis is constantly asking you to infer its meaning, and that begins as soon as you hit the character select. Although Vermis doesn't even tell you this is a character select. That's something you have to infer both from the title, Vermis, which this medical website tells me is the part of the brain that coordinates movements, as well as many cryptic passages about which flesh do you choose, which flesh is yours, leading me to believe that we the reader are meant to be some kind of disembodied spirit sliding into the brains of these characters and vermising them. And this idea comes up a lot, the idea that this body is not yours. What an unusual amount of emphasis to place on such a specific point. I wonder will that become relevant later. It's through these character sheets we can infer more about Vermis's world. Each page includes a text description of the character's past, their starting items, 4 stats broken into strength, intelligence, faith, and will. However, the most curious part about these character sheets is the morality gauge, with each character having an alignment.
Okay, so is it just me, or is like Super Habitual pronouncing some things really weird? I'm kind of holding back on this entire video, but like it's like every time he says RPG, he says ORPG, which again, that literally just might be the accent talking. But how did he say that?
Is the morality gauge.
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 Morality gauge? What? I mean, granted, as I said, I know accents are a thing, but I've never heard anybody who's spoken English as their first language say it as gauge. Like, you're replacing an A with an O. What?
With each character having an alignment between good and evil. But what's interesting is good and evil don't seem to mean quite what they do in our world. Rather, the actual page explaining good and evil isn't described as morality, but the kinds of flesh, where good is defined by a light cannot be faded by darkness. It will shine even in the darkest corners of the world. And evil, darkness is eternal, infinite, unrelenting. No one can escape it. We are born in the light and we rot in the dark. What's kind of interesting here is that these descriptions don't really reference...
That is dark, jeez.
Moral or virtue. Rather, they seem to be pointing out some vague capacity to endure despair. And what's interesting is the alignment of the characters supports this. The ones who are considered good are people with purpose, people who,
infant seeker,
through the darkness of this world, have managed to cling on to some vital piece of themselves, their memories, their identities, and use those to move forward. Whereas the evil characters are the opposite. People who have become overcome
waste of life.
Doing so, losing some core part of themselves, giving into madness or nihilism or one of the more insidious belief systems of Vermis's world. And again, that's an oddly specific point to make. And why is this image back on screen? What is that music? It's like we're building to some kind of conclusion, possibly suggesting some kind of alignment system. Immediately following the character select is a page called The Known Gods. But apart from this lovely little piece of flavor text, there's no actual information about who the...
Wait, I didn't read that, I'm sorry. The greater beings are deities out of our knowledge that demand devotion, punishment, or sacrifice. Some are older than time, some are sitting on thrones, and others are invisible to our eyes. They all shaped the world. And these are the known gods. Jesus. Okay.
Apart from this lovely little piece of flavor text, there's no actual information about who these gods are or how they relate to each other. Meaning, like everything in Vermis, if you want to understand them and thus their wider effect on the world, you're going to want to keep a pen and notebook to collect the little breadcrumbs of lore Vermis will occasionally drop you.
Just like all old games, like I'm not, granted, this is like way ahead of my time, but from all the stories I've heard of where like these old games were like dungeon crawlers where you'd have to make your own map as you're going through, or just all these sort of like old games where you need like a sheaf of paper with you and a pen because the game didn't tell you anything. You had to remember like all this stuff where, like, there was one game I've heard where, or actually several games, where to save memory space, if something happened in the game, it wouldn't actually tell you itself. It would refer you to a page and paragraph number, and you'd have to go into the manual to see what was actually happening, because the game was so limited that it didn't have the space on the floppy disk to actually tell you what was happening itself.
The first of those breadcrumbs coming when you turn the page and begin your journey in the shadow of a gigantic skeleton. This is Vermis' opening area, and the massive monolith of bones that looms above you is the corpse of Gervik the Great, one of the 6 gods. And the message is clear. Even gods suffer and die here.
Jeez.
You are no god. Like a lot of Plastobu's work,
What happens to the worship of a god that's dead?
Vermis conveys its world by combining different mediums and formats. Each time you enter a new location, those areas are brought to life through everything from serene, painterly landscape illustrations, disheveled, worn-out maps, even intricately detailed level blueprints. Each location conveyed in carefully written prose, the images and text merged into these meticulously bespoke page layouts where every tiny detail adds to the atmosphere, right down to the faded text and cracked line work. It all combines into such a beautifully distinctive vibe that if I was to reductively try and describe it, I'd say that it's Dark Souls shot through with Silent Hill, but in truth, nothing really feels like this. There's a silence to the world of Vermis, an ever-present crushing dread and beauty conveyed through the book's gaping halls and empty valleys.
You know, I've been looking through this, I'm reminded, this, like, is, like, the style of this is way before my time. Like, this almost seems like a game from, like the early 80s, or maybe even the 70s, maybe. Like, not even a computer, like, maybe like one of the earliest computer games where, again, as I said, where, like, anything that happened in the game, you'd be referred to somewhere in the manual or something. Like, when I'm looking at this, the one thing that I'm thinking of is, like, I'm feeling nostalgic. But I'm feeling nostalgia for, like, a time period that I wasn't even a part of. Like, I wasn't even a twinkle in my dad's eye when this kind of stuff was going on. So, like, is there a name for that? And this is called Vermis. I'm gonna have to look this up. This is most likely, like, again, one of those, like, fake game manuals that you can buy or something. And geez, if I had the money, I'd wanted to buy one just to look through this.
There's times where it feels downright peaceful, rare moments of quiet where the horrors fade away and you're allowed to just be. Welcome reprieves considering the abject nightmare that is everything else in this reality. A darkness you can feel in particular in your occasional encounters with other people. Other humans are rare in this world, and when you do encounter them, it's often in their final moments. You'll turn a corner and see a knight strike an exhausted killing blow on some great ogre, only for her to crumple to the ground, blood seeping out between the cracks in her armor, and she notices you. Desperate and pointless final words tumble out of her mouth, and then cease. When you do encounter the living, it's often people drowning in their own despair, like the Lonely Knight. An imposing looking figure, but someone just wandering this world looking for companionship. So lonely and broken after losing the person he loves that he will not even defend himself if attacked. And it's depressing. Geez. It's a land full of these broken people, some so exhausted and torn apart by the terrors of this place that they now just cower, shaking with madness and fear, their minds bent and warped. The warriors they were now gone, leaving only quivering shells.
Old gods, please help me. The horror. I can't look at them, rotten, dismembered, torn to shreds, and yet standing up, looking at me. Please, go away. I can't help you. Stop this madness.
Despair through horror is a huge part of Vermis. This is a world that is constantly trying to break you and every character in it, and that horror comes in many forms. You'll enter lonely forest cabins in search of some rest, only to awaken to the echo of strange chanting, as you notice there are no shadows under your feet, that this bizarre sentient place is trying to digest you. Worse than the places you'll find, though, are the things you find there. Vermis's monsters are creative as they are frightening. Plasto's eerie, uncanny artwork accompanied by some truly unsettling descriptions, like the pale swordsman marionette. Hidden in the shadows, a wooden abomination lurks endlessly throughout the insides of the labyrinth, endlessly wandering the long, dark hallways, crawling its walls like a spider. It's through these monsters you'll feel Vermis's world constantly attempt to pull at and manipulate the player. Like the Cellar Daughters, insect-like creatures that mimic the cries of children in hopes of drawing victims within range of its gnashing teeth, or the Dubious Friend, a fun-loving little fellow who prances and dances trying to convince you to follow him with whimsical cries of, "It is here! I am me! I have found it!" all while a long tendril protrudes from his back and trails into the shadows
darkness. It's a
him,
mimic.
as if
Oh
some
god.
unseen creature lies just out of sight, luring you into the darkness. Some monsters even serving as these gruesome cautionary tales as to the kinds of things that can happen people here, like the abyssal devotees of the Moonlit Tower, where the 6 different monsters you'll find there are all just these deranged cultists at different stages of some dark enlightenment. As they continue down the path towards some awful truth, their forms begin to crack and distort, their human shells crumbling away as they become grotesque floating nervous systems connected to a gleaming light, a creature that causes madness to anyone who approaches it, before ascending to their final impossible form, one that cannot be comprehended or destroyed.
Touched by the light, and it's just like the partial remains of a skull. It's okay.
Any trace of identity or humanity now gone. When Vermis is at its strongest is when it combines its atmospheric locations and unsettling monster design and uses them to tell these simple but extremely memorable little stories. When you first encounter the Green Sun ruins of the Goblin Princess, you expect what you would from any dungeon ruled by a Goblin Princess. But once you enter, something feels wrong. Initially, the only enemies you encounter are not goblins, but the undead, brought to life by a necromancer, and later,
again, there's always
a strange beast that lies trapped down a massive pit.
Oh, geez. Is that the goblin?
With bones.
Goblin
Any goblins
princess?
you do find are decrepit and old. They peer out at you from behind pillars, anxious to avoid combat. You make your way through the area, and you eventually encounter this dungeon's boss monster, the Goblin Knight. This formidable foe fights with slower yet aggressive movements. A direct blow from one of his axes could be fatal. If you carefully avoid or block his attacks for some time, you will eventually exhaust him, and that would be the optimal chance to thrust your weapon into one of the armor's apertures. Once you hurt him enough, he will fall to his knees. Exhausted, the Goblin Knight turns his head, staring into a dark hallway at the bottom of the room. He contemplates it for a few seconds, then screams at the top of his lungs and rises once again. The blood pours from his wounds like a fountain due to the pressure. He's going berserk. The night won't last long, but he will battle fiercely until the very end. Once you defeat the Goblin Knight, you're given the option to remove his helmet, and if you do, you discover he's not a goblin at all, but a human. And if you check the room he glanced at during your battle,
the princess's
you will discover
chamber,
a large sarcophagus containing the corpse of a long-dead human princess. And when you return to the hallway, you see the ghostly visage of this princess over the Goblin Knight's corpse. In Book 2, you learn the full meaning of this place, the tale of a malicious queen who built her kingdom on the bones of these scrawny creatures, the goblins fearfully following her every command. The queen soon grew beyond cruel, becoming torturous and depraved, to the point that when she gave birth to 2 daughters, One was a beautiful young girl who would become known as the Goblin Princess, and the other an abomination, a punishment for the Queen's sins.
So I was technically right. That was a goblin princess, just not the main one.
The Queen had her monstrous daughter hurled down a well where it grew into a terrible beast, to which she enjoyed feeding her servants, while her other daughter, and opposite in many ways, grew more empathetic and loving to the terrified goblins who once lived so freely, eventually mounting a rebellion and overthrowing her evil mother and casting her down into the pit to be devoured by the daughter she had imprisoned there. The princess, protected by her loyal goblin knight, turned this land into a sanctuary where no goblin blood would ever be spilled again. Until you, the goblins, feebly attempting to guard the corpse of the princess who had showed them so much empathy and kindness. The princess, now cold and withered, her good deeds forgotten by the world except by her servants, who still stare at you from the shadows. Vermis is a extremely
so sad
grim world, to the point that if it actually existed as a video game, I don't know how fun it would be. There's moments where Vermis relies on putting the player through unreasonable levels of cruelty. Exhaustion and loneliness are a huge part of this world, something you can see in the infinite hallways of the Shade Sanctum that trap the player for hours or days, where mind-numbing repetition and insanity begins to eat at the character. And while moments like that are really effective in concept, the idea of actually playing them sounds kind of unbearable. I think it's interesting that the format of a fake video game allows Vermis to go to these extremes, trapping the player in concept in the unbearable levels of cruelty of these hellish places. And in this regard, there is one area of Vermis that stands above all others.
Oh god, how bad does this get? Wait, death in the looking glass. They've been talking literal death, like the concept of death.
You know that feeling of waking up from a nightmare where everything seems normal until you notice something is wrong and you realize you're still in that nightmare? Well, the Glass Purgatory is an
I've never
entire
had one of those
dungeon
dreams.
built around that idea. Not long into Vermis's second book, the player happens upon a gargantuan mirror surrounded by skeletons, all of whom seem to have just been people who sat down and wasted to nothing. A strange melody draws you towards the mirror's unusually pristine reflection, and you realize that you can walk into this mirror, and when you do, you enter a strange new reality. Even by Vermis' standards, the Glass Purgatory is bizarre and cruel, crawling with impossible monsters, some of which, like the Conjoined, echo the people who have lost themselves to this place. Their corpses and identities now twisting together into these nameless abominations. While Vermis' dungeons usually last about a dozen pages, the Glass Purgatory just keeps going as you endure an endless parade of ordeals. Spectral figures grasp at you from beneath the surfaces of lakes before transforming into terrifying aquatic leviathans.
You know, I'm almost thinking like, this is like, this world, this Vermis world, it is it's the epitome of grimdark. I know when you think of grimdark, you think of, 40K and Warhammer and all that, like worlds where, it's where, if you want to like boil things down to its most simplest degree, it's a world where it sucks for everybody. There's nothing good in it. But like this is true grimdark, because like even in, 40K and the stories and stuff like that, good things do happen in individual stories, but this is just where, what if like it seemed like the entire universe was not just dying, but was already dead, and it was just the people who were in it that hadn't caught up to it. Like the gods can die, and some are already dead. Like it just, every aspect just wants to kill you. Everything is depressing. Everything is dark and sad. that's that thing that I was talking about earlier, where like it felt like this, like the art style and stuff for this came from like the early 80s or like late 70s. That it all like the way like the dithering, I believe is the right word, the pictures are like dithered. It almost feels like those very, very early like first edition pictures that you'd see in like Warhammer, like the Warhammer books and stuff like that, and other like early Dungeons and Dragons books and stuff like that. Again, it's that whole like nostalgia for an era that you weren't even present for, that I wasn't even present for. It's so weird.
Cults worshipping an old, evil, forgotten god, and perhaps most
Oh, so there
strange
were forgotten
creatures
gods
that seem able to stare out past the pages of the book and into you, the reader, aware that this body is not yours, asking to whom thy flesh belongs. Thy flesh does not belong to thee. These encounters are often violent and frightening, but the true hell is what happens after. The player's hard-fought victories met with nothing but the appearance of strange mirrors.
More mirrors.
Mirrors that drag you deeper into the glass purgatory's bowels. Over and over, this happens. There's times when you think you've escaped, when you feel the gentle breeze and the sunlight hit your skin and you're free, only for another mirror to materialize, and you awaken trapped further in this nightmare. Soon, the very sight of mirrors becomes frightening, your own reflection, an abyss that plummets you deeper into this void, and time and space begin to distort. Days, weeks, months pass as you walk infinite, endless hallways, a cursed, numbing rot eating your limbs, and terrible faces grin out at you from every reflective surface. Sleep becomes impossible, your dreams stalked by ghoulish figures, and exhaustion and despair consumes everything you are, all while over and over you pray for relief. Over and over, a mirror shatters that hope. Finally, the player finds themselves on some impossibly
Great
deep level
bell
of the glass
tower.
purgatory, a massive bell tower, at the top of which you encounter it. The Godless Servant, a depraved creature searching among a pile of headless corpses and placing those heads where its own should be, only for them to tumble off. It is frightening, but it's also pathetic. Something about this creature feels so sad, so familiar, and upon noticing you, it attacks. But its movements are slow and feeble. It's been through an intense amount of punishment and is easily defended against, its only attacks being its weak, grasping hands, which repeatedly attempt to pull at your skull, till eventually the pathetic creature is defeated and crumples to the ground, its hands still weakly grasping towards you. And that's when you realize, in horror, you know what this creature is.
What?
It's you. Your body. Your real body. The weight of the depravity drops you to your knees, and you do the only thing that makes sense anymore. You remove your own head and reattach it to this piece of yourself that you lost so long ago. And for a moment, the mist seeps gently around you, a cool breeze on your skin, and you feel relief, before collapsing to the ground as blood pools beneath you and you stare into your reflection one final time, not with horror, but with acceptance. This is just me. A bell tolls and you awaken in front of the mirror that started everything, but now you're truly free, and you leave the identity of your character behind. For now you are simply you. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand this ending. Like everything in Vermis, it's weird and opaque, but my personal read is that Vermis is full of all these awful things, obsessed with separating your spirit from your flesh, and its world is littered with people who have lost that battle, who've become so numb and hollow and crushed that their identity, their existence has corroded to nothing under this endless torrent of cruelty. But then there's you, the player, and you can feel that weight constantly, but particularly in the glass purgatory, this nightmare that exists to grind you down and leave you desolate and lost and broken. Just another story of Vermis's world that will never end. But you persevere, you survive, and in doing so, you find this lost part of yourself, reuniting your body and spirit, making your identity whole. Because ultimately, all you ever really have is your body.
That's it. At the beginning, that's why he kept bringing up the whole thing of like, this is just the flesh that you're taking control of. It's not yours.
Is your mind. You are the connection between those two things. And what Vermis ultimately says to me is no matter how bleak the world that surrounds you, you will be okay as long as you can cling to you. That's a lot more than I was expecting to get from a fake video game walkthrough.
Yeah, oh god.
Okay, back to that original question. Have I wasted a significant portion of my life making this video?
I mean, I wouldn't think so.
That's kind of for you to decide. The truth is, I've been working on this
You heard what he
for
said. He did
so
not.
long, and I don't know how I feel about it anymore. I worry that the topic is too niche and that not many people besides me will care about it. But I think that's kind of why I needed to make this. When I talked about eye patch wolves at the start of this video, yeah, part of that is because I like selling t-shirts. But the truth is, building that world has been some of the most fulfilling shit of my entire life. And I want that for other people. I want people to build their own worlds. And I think fake video games are an amazing way to do it. It is still such a new art form, and people are still pushing the limits and figuring out what's possible. People like Plasto, and it's so fucking
And he's not even
awesome.
making a
And
real video game.
I wanted to shine a light on that will introduce, hopefully, a lot of new people to the concept. So if you've been watching this video and thinking, oh man, I'd love to make my own fake video game, fucking do. There is nothing stopping you that wasn't stopping every single creator we've talked about. Go. Build those worlds so that I can walk around in them. There. That's it. That's my video.
Oh god. I mean, some of these, just some of the worlds that these people create, and especially that last one, Vermis, that world. I mean, I'm gonna definitely have to look it up, and I need to see if there are other people who have, you know, talked about this and could better explain that ending. I mean, at the same time, I mean, I can very much accept that whole thing where it's just it's like your mind and body finally coming back together after who knows where or who knows how long. Fake video games, man. I mean, sometimes more interesting than the real thing. That was absolutely wonderful. And yeah, of course, as always, original videos linked in the description if you haven't seen it yet. I mean, why in God's name are you watching a reaction before seeing the original thing? But yeah, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like, subscribe if you have not. And I might have some reading to do in the future. Goodbye.